just saw the next line. Often referring him to by the cute pet name of Cocksucker. Oh my god, Bill Murray. Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of Brain Blaze. As always, hello there, I'm your host Simon. What happens here? Danny writes me a secret. Let's try that again. I'm here, Danny writes me a script, I'm going to read it. Sam is going to edit it. Let's get into it. This is the most toxic movie sets ever. Here we go. Casino Royale. This was a good Bond movie, right? This was Daniel Craig's first outing as JB. After working my way through a marathon of 24 James Bond films a couple of years back. Is that all of them? How many James Bond movies are there? That feels about right. I would argue that a strong contender for the worst Bond movie ever is 1983's Octopussy, produced during a bleak period when the whole 007 franchise was beginning to feel more than a little shagged out. Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of very forgettable James Bond movies. There are some absolute crackers, and then I must have seen them all because they would always run on TV before they're, like, I don't know, some channel like ITV or would get the rights to be the first one to put the new James Bond movie, which is by that point like 7 years old, on TV, and they get a bit overexcited about it and then run like every James Bond movie from history every week until the final week where they'd air the new one. It'd be like, oh, so I've definitely seen them all.
I can't believe this story you're telling me. It's macabre.
But even Octopussy appears to be a rich chasm of sophistication when compared to the mind-boggling show that was Casino Royale. Well, I thought this was a good one. I'm not talking about the classy 2006 version with Daniel Craig, okay? I'm talking about the largely incomprehensible, sprawling mess that was the original 1967 spoof version. I feel like I have vaguely heard of this. When I watched this for the first time, I had no idea of the production background and even less idea of what it was meant to be going into the movie. I couldn't understand why there were about 8 different actors sharing the lead role of James Bond, or why so few of the fragmented plot lines seemed to fit together. And it turns out this was for a fairly good reason. How on earth did this movie end up getting released? Did you recast your main actor like 7 times? The movie writes to Ian Fleming's first Bond novel, Casino Royale, had taken a long and complicated journey, entirely separate from the main run of Bond films, which by 1967 had chalked up 4 Sean Connery outings. In fact, Sean Connery was originally asked to reprise the role for this alternative step into the Bond multiverse, but producer Charles K. Feldman turned down the actor's outrageous demands for a $1 million fee. Which, I mean, okay, yeah, this is a lot of money, maybe 10 million or more today. But still, he's Sean Connery, he's James Bond, and do you want him to play a spoof version of himself? He needs to get paid.
No, sir, I don't like it.
Peter Sellers was instead invited to take on the lead role, although he was said to be disappointed by the decision to play it for laughs, as he had been keen to play it straight. Did you read the script? Surely, if something's going to be a spoof, you're going to read the script and be like, nah, this is a spoof. Shouldn't play this one straight. Sellers would go on to become the movie's biggest headache by far. His marriage to Britt Ekland was crumbling at the time, and the former goon was more interested in sneaking off in doomed attempts to save it rather than turning up to the set on time. The clearly irritated star began demanding rewrites at the 11th hour and throwing tantrums at the slightest inconvenience. I do find this a bit baffling. Like, I listened to this great podcast called Victory, which talks about, there's a great show called Entourage, which is now like 15 something years old. And it basically talks, it's got a couple of actors and the writer from that show. And they talk about it and like how they deal with some actors who are like, they show up late, they don't learn their lines and all of this shit. And it's like, bro, just do it! You've literally got the job that people dream of. Like, I don't very often complain about being a YouTube person because it's fucking great. And yeah, there are definitely times where it sucks, but I don't really make much complaints about that because overall it's really good. So whenever you hear like actors being tools and shit, I'm always like, bro, you basically get to do your hobby as a career and you get paid a fuck ton of money for it. Shut up and go to work. It also, just from a PR perspective, makes you look like an absolute bellend because there's some dude who's packing bags in Sainsbury's and he's hearing you complain about some shit and he's like, And the matter wasn't helped when the chairman of the film's distributor, Columbia Pictures, Leo Jaffe, bumped into Sellers but mistook him for Woody Allen. In a rare moment of good humor, Sellers thought it might be funny to play along and pretend that he actually was Woody Allen. It's exactly the sort of thing I would do if someone was like, "Oh, Michael, Vsauce Michael." I'd be like, "Nice to meet you." Nice to meet you. I've got a great video about the benefits of racism coming up. No, I wouldn't do that. Michael's a legend. I've not met him, but he seems cool. But the gag fell flat when Leo then proceeded to engage Woody Allen in a conversation about their complete and utter bellend known as Peter Sellers. It's like American Psycho. Paul Anna's mistaken me for that dickhead Marcus Halberstram, or however that line goes. Christian Bale's voice in this movie, always like this. Very polished, very practiced, very strange.
Something wrong? Patrick? You're sweating.
Let's see Paul Allen's card.
Oh, he did for sure!
Turns up to film a memorable scene in which his character faces Bond across the casino's baccarat table. Sellers felt intimidated by the presence of Orson Welles and was incredibly peeved when Princess Margaret visited the set but completely ignored the film's leading star in a rush to shake hands with Orson. Bro, you're on a movie set with a bunch of other celebrities. People are going to have their favorites. That's okay. Get over yourself, Peter Sellers, whoever you are. I mean, I've heard of you, but I don't really know what you've done, what you've been in. All I really know about you is you sound like a bit of a belle. Sellers was also allegedly still alive. Probably not. Hopefully not. I mean, I don't wish him dead, but he sounds like a pain in the arse. Sellers was also pretty offended when Orson called him a tardy amateur who was responsible for making the movie snowball over budget. Sellers complained to the director and his good personal friend Joseph McGrath about Orson's behavior, but this ended with Sellers punching his good buddy in frustration. How did Sellers have a good friend? Sellers sounds like no one wants to be friends with him. He sounds like a knob. After both Sellers and Orson both stormed off the set in a mutual refusal to work with each other, the bulk of the movie's most iconic scenes of the baccarat table were ultimately recorded on different days, with both actors filming their contributions separately. Oh, I'm sorry, the same actors, but just then they cut together. That's fine. It was around this time that Sellers felt that he'd had enough of this bullshit and buggered off to Sweden, leaving behind a massively over-budgeted and only half-completed movie in his wake. Sellers, mate, are you not familiar with contracts? Because you're going to get in trouble. And then also, more importantly, no one's going to work with you again. Is this why I don't know who you are? It's like, if you're a nightmare to work with, it doesn't really matter how talented you are. The producers got around this by inventing an entirely new framing device in which David Niven plays a stammering James Bond called out of retirement, setting the scene for disjointed sequences in which all MI6 agents have been renamed James Bond for safety reasons. Oh my god, this sounds so shit. The Peter Sellers footage is then shoved into a kaleidoscope collection of unrelated segments in which a whole bunch of other actors, including, funnily enough, Woody Allen, are all playing their own version of a spy named Bond. As if that wasn't bad enough, no less than 5 directors came on board to complete the movie, but it appears that none of them bothered to exchange notes, leading to an uneven and largely baffling mismatch of espionage action, clever slapstick, clever satire, and pure slapstick. In the film's defense, Casino Royale can still be enjoyed today as a curious slice of 1960s psychedelia and might go down well with a bucket of hallucinogenic mushrooms. It sounds terrifying. You'd be like, did they swap out the actors? Who's James Bond? It sounds scary, to be honest. But even the director of the more authentic 2006 version, Martin Campbell, has revealed that he's never been able to make it all the way through the original. That's okay. It's probably best he doesn't, because then he'll make it like, if you're like, I've got to direct the new Casino Royale, people will be like, don't watch the original. No, don't do it. Bearing in mind that the final budget escalated to over $12 million, it might have proved a shrewder move in the long term to just give Sean Connery the $1 million that he was demanding to make a semi-coherent movie. Yeah, no shit. And he would have deserved it. He's Sean Connery, not some bellend called Sellers. The Royal Tenenbaums. Oh. 2 things that I'm going to guess come up in this entry. 1, well, I don't know how Danny feels about the Royal Tenenbaums. It's a weird movie. Wes Anderson. I love Wes Anderson. And the Royal Tenenbaums is... Nah, the Darjeeling Limited is probably my favorite Wes Anderson movie, but the Royal Tenenbaums, it's got to be a... God damn, all Wes Anderson movies are just good. So it's just a great movie.
おや、気づきましたか。
陸殿も好き者にござるな。
Isn't it? And also, it's got Bill Murray, who's notoriously a legend, but also difficult to work with. So I'm guessing that's going to come up. It's sad that this was difficult on the set, though. It's such a beautiful movie. One of my all-time favorite Wes Anderson films, Legends, is the sparkling 2001 comedy classic in which a deliciously dysfunctional family reunite for a gathering at which the estranged father, played by Gene Hackman, attempts to bury the hatchet by falsely claiming that he has a terminal illness. And it seems a shame that a film bursting with so much sweetness and joy was apparently a complete pain in the ass to make. Wes Anderson had assembled a pretty impressive cast, like he does for every movie because he's Wes Anderson, including Gene Hackman, Ben Stiller, Owen Wilson, Danny Glover, Angelica Houston, a pre-vagina candle Gwyneth Paltrow, and Bill Murray, legend. One of those cast members was destined to make life difficult for everyone. It's gonna be Bill Murray. It's gotta be. Can you guess who? Well, here's a plot twist. It wasn't Bill Murray. No! It's got to be Gene Hackman then, right? In fact, he turned out to be the heroic cowboy in the saga. Wow, awesome. I know Bill Murray's had some stories about he's difficult to work with, but whenever I read them, I'm always like, well, he just sounds like he just didn't give a f*** because he's Bill Murray. He's a legend. And the other guy was often being a dick or something. So, I don't know. I just love Bill Murray. Legend. The real villain was Gene Hackman, who never wanted to appear in the film in the first place. It's a Wes Anderson movie, Gene. It's going to be good. Everyone is going to love it. Wes Anderson had written the role with Gene in mind, and this apparently troubled the actor as he didn't like taking on roles specifically written for him. Gene also wouldn't have been particularly impressed with how much money he was being offered to appear in such a low-budget film. According to his own agent, Gene doesn't usually open his eyes for less than $3 million, and yet after Gene's repeatedly turning down the role for 18 months, it was the same agent who eventually twisted the actor's arm and persuaded him to give it a go. But Gene turned out to be a bit of a grumpy sausage on set. Most of the other cast members admitted they were genuinely scared of him, but it was the director Wes Anderson who bore the brunt of Gene's relentless fury. Gene repeatedly used the C word to describe Wes on set, and at one point barked at him to pull up his pants and act like a man. Holy shit, Gene. It's Wes Anderson. Bill Murray was the only member of the crew not to be shitting their pants in terror around Gene. Just like Bill Murray. It's like, f*** off, Gene, you twat. Often referring to... I just saw the next line. Often referring him to by the cute pet name of Cocksucker. Oh my god, Bill Murray. Bill Murray, everybody. And here's the really sweet bit. Even when Bill had a day off from filming, he'd still show up on set wearing a cowboy hat purely to help diffuse any tensions and shield Wes Anderson from the worst of Gene Hackman's cantankerous outbursts. And that is why, I mean, that's got to be one of the reasons, Wes Anderson is like, I'm doing a movie. I want Bill Murray in it. Amazing. It worked out, Bill. You know it didn't work out for? The cocksucker. Still, it seems there were no hard feelings in the long term. Wes Anderson described Gene as a huge force of nature. He gave him a tough time, but worked hard on the film, whilst Gwyneth Paltrow reckoned that somebody as big as Gene is allowed to have bad moods. Why? Just because you're super famous doesn't mean you get to be... Also... You're also on a set with a lot of, and I don't want to say that just because the other people are famous that means you can be a dick to everyone else. But it's also like, you got to think that a little bit, right? Because they're on your level. They do the same thing as you. I don't get it. You don't get to be a dick just because you're rich and famous. I'm sorry. I mean, you do in some situations, but not like this. And by in some situations, I mean, let's just say, I don't mean that just because of this, but if you've paid for something, if you're rich and you're buying something and then it turns out to be shit, you get to be a bit more pissed off than if you bought something for 99p. Bill Murray felt that much of Gene's irascibility, big word there, Danny, stemmed from some of the younger co-stars continually fluffing their lines, which led to endless retakes. For example, Luke Wilson, younger brother of Owen, I know who Luke Wilson is, was apparently infatuated with Gwyneth Paltrow and wasn't really concentrating on the job at hand, much to the increasing frustration of Gene, who just wanted to get every scene in the can. Bill also appeals to regret his crude choice of pet name for Gene and feels that some of the accusations levelled at the star over his long career are blown out of proportion. He's just such a dick that he gave him the nickname Cocksucker. As he puts it, quote, "I'd hear all these stories like Gene threatened to set a fire for all of us today. You're in the union. You can't set anyone on fire." Yeah, that's the reason he can't set anyone on fire. Though. Your union's up. They can't set you on fire. Good point. Gene can't get you if you're part of the union, that cocksucker. In my opinion. What happened to baby Jane? It may have been for the best that the movie legends Bette Davis and Joan Betty, no one cares, and Joan Crawford seemed destined to never appear on the same movie set. During the peak of their glittering careers in the 1930s and 1940s, the bitter rivals had often found themselves competing fiercely for I'm still struggling after that Bill Murray thing. For the same parts and slagging each other off. A legendary feud was first ignited back in 1933 when Bette Davis won her first major leading role in the film Ex-Lady and was expecting blanket press coverage on the day the movie was released. But Joan Crawford was inconsiderate enough to announce her impending divorce on the very same day. That bitch. Stealing her limelight, which dominated headlines and squeezed Ex-Lady out of the pages. The film subsequently flopped and was pulled from theatres within the first week, and Bette felt that this was entirely Joan's fault. It wasn't Bette. Your movie was just shit. It seems to me that Bette Davis... Is it Betty Davis? I don't know. Fuck. I'm now confused. It's B-E-T-T-E. There's no Y on the end. Why would you have a name like this? And I bet this is some like Hollywood chosen name. You know, it's not our actual name. If you're going to choose a name for like a Hollywood name, go for something like Cage. Like Nick Cage. Boom. Easy. 4 letters. Everyone knows what a fucking Cage is. Although it'd be like, actually, it's Cage. Nicolas Cage.
Oh, mon Dieu.
Oh, the foof.
It seems to me that Bette Davis was one who continually stoked the flames of the feud and simmered in childish, burning resentment. In 1935, she fell in love with her co-star, Franchot. I have no idea how to pronounce that. It's like Franchot. Franchot during the production of Dangerous, the movie for which she won her first Academy Award, and she was incensed when rival Joan later invited Franchot around for dinner, allegedly answering the door in the buff. Oh my. The pair would later get married, so I assume the dinner was well prepared. Even as late as 1987, Betty was still complaining that she would never forgive Joan for ruthlessly stealing Franchot away from her, but surely Franchot had some sort of say in all of this. Yeah, he did. They weren't married. Chill the out. At least Betty bagged the Oscar, if not the co-star. Throughout the decades to follow, Betty and Joan would continue to publicly exchange their venomous insults in the press. Betty described Joan as a shallow mannequin who had slept with every star on the MGM lot apart from Lassie.
I mostly just read Zootopia porn, so...
You what?
Joan will be like, Betty, that's only because you f***ed Lassie so much he was worn out. Boom! Drop that mic, Betty. Drop it.
Do it!
In response, Joan suggested that Betty was a phony who looked like she had never had a happy day or night in her life. Betty would go on to win another Oscar in 1938, whilst Joan won her only Academy Award in 1945. By the time we get to the 1960s, their careers had largely dried up without their paths ever having crossed on the silver screen. Until somebody had the bright idea of putting these two arch-enemies together for a comeback movie. Why the f*** would you do that? Cocksucker. What could possibly go wrong? In many ways, it wasn't such an utterly ridiculous notion. The sinister psychological thriller, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, focuses on two feuding sisters who can't stand each other's guts but are forced to live together in a ramshackle old house. You know, I get why this is a clever idea, but also, I mean, actors, they do something called acting, which is where they pretend shit. Why don't we just have two people who like each other do that so the working environment's not a horrible piece of shit, because we know how this is going to go. You could argue that this was perfect casting. Yeah, by a casting director who doesn't understand that actors have the job of acting. What the fuck? With little acting required from either side. They're actors! It's the one job! It's the one fucking thing they have to do!
Daddy, chill.
Joan was well up for the idea, but she needed to persuade Betty to sign on the dotted line. Betty eventually agreed on 2 conditions. The first was that she played the title character of Jane, and the second more curious condition was the director, Robert Aldridge, needed to convince her that he definitely wasn't sleeping with Joan, even though there had never been the slightest suggestion of such a relationship. How are you going to get that sorted? As Betty rather casually put it, it wasn't that I cared about their private lives, I just didn't want him favouring her with more close-ups. Trouble started brewing on set before the cameras even had a chance to start rolling. Shocking. Joan's 4th and final marriage had been to Pepsi Cola CEO Alfred Steele, who had died just 3 years earlier. Joan had taken a spot on the board of directors for Pepsi, which she kept right up until 1973. Whenever I hear this, I'm like, what the f***'s going on? You inherited a seat on the board from your CEO husband. That would be like Grimes being on the board of Tesla. Like, what the fuck? It's no coincidence that they're not married anymore. Were they ever married? I don't know. I don't care. But it would be stupid.
This is a fucking nightmare! That's it awful! Fucking hell!
It's no coincidence that Betty's first move was to have a Coca-Cola machine installed in her dressing room and then to hand out free drinks to everyone on set just to get under Joan's skin. When the cameras did start rolling, one particular scene was always likely to be a bit troubling as it involved Betty hitting Joan in the head. Joan naturally didn't trust Betty on this one, so she demanded a stunt double for most of the shots, but there was one close-up shot which couldn't be faked with stunt double trickery. And this was the moment that Betty punched Joan so hard in the head that Joan reportedly required 3 stitches and was left with a massive lump on her forehead. So, yeah, you would, wouldn't you? Betty later sniffily claimed, I barely touched her. If you barely touched her, she wouldn't need 3 stitches, would she? Joan got her own back, though, during a scene in which Betty was required to drag her out of bed and across the floor. There are differing accounts as to the actual trick Joan pulled to make it as hard as possible for Betty, but depending on who you believe, she either wore a hidden weightlifting belt, filled her pockets with rocks, or sewed weights into her dress, and just to rub salt into the wounds, Joan also purposefully fluffed each take so that Betty would have to heave the deadweight Joan across the floor until she put her back out. The feuding even continued long after the film was released to wide acclaim. Oh. I'm kind of disappointed that the film actually worked out, because this seems like a really shitty way to do a film. Whatever Happened to Baby picked up 5 Oscar nominations, but in a cruel snub to Joan, only Betty was nominated for Best Actress, while Joan was completely overlooked. Oh, that is gonna f***ing hurt. And here's the point where Joan became uncharacteristically spiteful. Sarcasm, Danny, maybe? She desperately contacted all the other nominees for Best Actress and offered to pick up the award on their behalf if they couldn't attend the ceremony. Only one nominee, Anne Bancroft, couldn't make the bash, so she accepted Joan's thoughtful offer. What are you doing that you are so busy that you can't go to the Academy Awards where you're nominated for Best Actor? What have you got going on in your life? You wouldn't believe it, Anne Bancroft won the award, so on what was potentially a big night for Bette Davis, it was actually Joan Crawford who stepped up on stage to fondle an Oscar. It's not hers though, is it? She spent the rest of the evening hobnobbing backstage with the winners whilst Betty went home early and sopped into her pie and peas supper. Quite incredibly, the pair still agreed to team up again for another similar movie, Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte, in 1964, but this time Joan stormed off the set within the first few days of filming, having finally had enough of Betty's taunting behaviour. Lassie's professional reputation remains untarnished, but he has yet to pick up a single Oscar nomination after 80 glorious years on screen. The nice guys always finish last. Yes, and this is where this video finishes. Thanks for watching. Let's see Paul Allen's card.
Oh, he did for sure!